There cannot be any doubt whatsoever, at least not for me, after having interviewed so many experts from all different fields of science, doctors, virologists, epidemiologists, economists, lawyers, psychologists, psychiatrists. There cannot be any doubt whatsoever that what has been happening here for a year now, these are the worst crimes against humanity ever committed. This is worse than what happened in World War II and, of course, in World War I. I'm a lawyer, and I've been a trial lawyer for 26 years now. My firm and I, with some of the people working for me for 20 years now, we have been representing consumers and small and medium-sized businesses against fraudulent corporations. Yeah. Because of this experience, in particular with Deutsche Bank, which is one of the most criminal organizations in this world, I wasn't completely surprised at what was unfolding before our eyes in the context of Corona, except this time it's not just one fraudulent corporation, but it's dozens and dozens of fraudulent corporations, plus the politicians whom they managed to get under their control. There cannot be any doubt whatsoever, at least not for me, after having interviewed so many experts from all different fields of science, doctors, virologists, epidemiologists, economists, lawyers, psychologists, psychiatrists. There cannot be any doubt whatsoever that what has been happening here for a year now, these are the worst crimes against humanity ever committed. This is worse than what happened in World War II and, of course, in World War I. What's even worse is that so many people are participating in this, the same type of people who participated some 80 years ago in what was then going to be World War II. I'm not just saying this, I'm quoting this from Vera Sharaf, who is a Holocaust survivor. She was a child then. She was in Auschwitz. And she said, "This is so incredible. I would never have believed that I'm once again going to have to fight the very same people whom I fought 80 years ago." I know there's some people out there who may not quite work with actual evidence. Well, it's different with us because we have been speaking to all these scientists and other people, over 100 in the meantime, and this is all replicable. And what's going to happen is it will be replicated because those very same people who testified before our Corona Investigative Committee can just as well testify before the courts of law, and they will. We all know now, I mean, we should know, those 10 or 20% of us who still have a brain to use and to think with, this has never been about the virus. This has never been about health. This has always been about taking everything away from us so that we would be dependent on them, plus population reduction, plus gaining complete control over those who are left. That is, I wouldn't have said this a year ago. A year ago, if you had asked me, or if somebody had told me this, I would have said, hey, you definitely need to see a doctor. But no, this is what all the evidence, all of the people who we interviewed on the Corona Committee, what this points to. This conclusion is inevitable. What we're dealing with is probably 0.00000 something, 1% of the population trying to gain control over the rest of the world. This is not about money because this group of people, maybe 3,000, this group of people, they're the super rich. They have, in terms of financial assistance, they have much more than they need. They're not going to need to buy a 10th or a third yacht or the 20th Maserati or whatever. So this is not really about money. It is about money because they're using money in order to bribe people in the hospitals, the doctors, politicians. They're also using all kinds of psychological techniques in order to manipulate people, or they threaten people. Many politicians, some of them may be threatened, some of them may be getting bribed, but it's not really about money. They're using money as a tool. So what we think is what they're really up to is, you have to keep in mind that the very same people, a part of which we now call the Davos clique, the self-appointed political elite and the self-appointed corporate elite, that is part of the people who we're dealing with. And this globalism is what got us here. We ended up with global, what do you call them? What do you call the WHO, the World Economic Forum? These are private global organizations which have taken control over the entire world. Private organizations run by the super rich. I think this is, once people understand this, it's not going to be too hard to turn the tables. And those are the ones who are responsible for the financial crisis some 10 or 12 years ago. Had we been a little more careful, had we looked a little closer, we would have known that for 30 years, this group of people has been stealing the taxpayers' money all over the world. We should have been a lot more careful. The first financial crisis would have been the perfect chance for us to catch on to what's going on. They managed to tell us that they have everything under control. They didn't. But they started to print money in order to keep us quiet. We should have known that you cannot print money in order to restore what they have stolen. It doesn't make any sense. Well, this time around, in late 2019, I believe, when things were again coming to a head and things were again about to implode, they came up with Corona as a diversionary tactic. And we have to keep in mind, however, we're not dealing with a monolithic wall on the other side. There's lots of infighting. There's contradicting interests, and that's another one of our chances that we have. And we're about to reach the tipping point, I think, because there's so many mistakes that they're making. Because I don't think that all these adverse reactions to the vaccines are part of the plan. And that's because they're trying to rush this thing through. And I think what happened is we have a whistleblower, and she told us that the original plan was to roll this out in 2050. But then those who are involved in this got greedy and pulled things forward to 2030 and then to 2020. And that's why we think that's why so many mistakes are happening. Because as I said, they did not really, I don't think, and we don't think, they did not really intend these adverse reactions to happen and to warn even those people who are still sort of in line with the government. And as we all know now, this is not a vaccination. It's called a vaccine, but it isn't. The only reason why the European Union calls it a vaccine is because it's something that's being injected. It's another one of those sleight of hand tricks, just like they changed, the WHO changed the definition of a pandemic exactly for this purpose, in order to create a pandemic during the swine flu. And here they changed the definition of what a vaccine is by saying, of course, it's a genetic experiment, but since we're injecting it into people, it's not a genetic experiment anymore. It's a vaccine. It's extremely dangerous. I just got a press release from Professor Bhakti, who's one of the main players in this. He's a specialist. He and a bunch of other doctors just published a press release today, and it deals with the side effects of these so-called vaccinations. Clotting and bleeding after vaccination is the rule, and there are many people, not just a few, many people who die. They suffer strokes and aneurysm, et cetera, et cetera. So, but he's detailing this, even though this is just, I'm going to mail it to you. This is just a short press release, but it tells you that there's a huge fight going on, in particular here in Europe, also in the United States, about whether or not they can make this mandatory. At this point, they can't. When we talk about a class action lawsuit, it's not just one. Thus far, one has been filed in Canada. Another one is on its way to be filed, and we're planning to file a couple of more. We means the colleagues, my Anglo-American colleagues, because I'm just one of the people who is trying to put together the evidence by filing many other lawsuits, many other individual lawsuits, for example, in Germany, in order to get the courts to say, Drosten is lying to you. He kept telling the world that his PCR test is great because it does an incredible trick. It makes things visible that are not visible to the human eye by amplifying it. What we call the retraction paper, its authors include 22 internationally highly renowned scientists. And as it turns out, what they're writing about the Drosten-Corman or Corman-Drosten paper, the PCR test protocol, is so devastating. What they're saying is two things. It is completely unscientific, and the second thing is it looks as though it was done in such a sloppy way on purpose, for the sole purpose of producing as many false positives as possible all over the world, so that their agenda, which ends with the so-called vaccinations, which of course we all know now it doesn't have anything to do with vaccinations. What we're dealing with is genetic experiments. The lockdowns are all based on the same Drosten test, all of them, because his test was recommended by the WHO as the gold standard for the entire world, and all of the other PCR tests that I think there are about 300 or 500 in the meantime, they all used his test as a blueprint. Of course, all of them know that these tests cannot tell you anything about infections, but they're all making a lot of money, so they don't care. I've spoken with a couple of these PCR test makers. Of course, they're not going to admit it in public, but at least behind closed doors, they admit it as much. The second lie that was important for this whole thing to go down is also his invention. He claimed that there are asymptomatic infections, meaning people who show no symptoms whatsoever, which is normally you're healthy, they can be infectious. That was important for him to make everyone in the entire world afraid of everyone, no matter how healthy they looked.
It's ridiculous.
And it is totally ridiculous. It makes no sense, because what are you going to do if you don't have any symptoms? Are you really going to go see a doctor just because of what this idiot Drosten says? What are you going to do? You're going to go see a doctor. I have something. I don't know what it is, but can you help me? Please tell me what I'm suffering from. The first question the doctor is going to ask you is, what symptoms do you have?
Right.
None. It doesn't make any sense. The good thing is that in the meantime, we have two decisions. There are going to be more, but we have two decisions by courts of law that say that this Drosten test doesn't even come close to telling you anything about infections. The first decision is about 4, 5, 6 months old, I think. It was a decision by a Portuguese appellate court, which held that these Drosten tests, these PCR tests, can't tell you anything about infections. And the second decision is only 2 days old. We got it 2 days ago, I think, or maybe it was yesterday, from a Vienna court. And it again holds very clearly that these tests cannot tell you anything about infections. Now, the big question is, how many more decisions do we need until the class actions for damages are going to pick up real speed? They are pending, but there are going to be more such cases. And we are very optimistic right now, because we can see all the mistakes that are being made by the other side, that we are close to a tipping point, so that this whole thing, the power structure will be completely different after we reach this tipping point, and then we can, or the colleagues who are working on these class actions for damages, they're going to be able to concentrate on that. And some of them, in particular in the United States, have some pretty good ideas about how there are different legal avenues to go after the pharmaceutical and the tech industry, and maybe the financial industry as well. But in the end, it may very well turn out that we're going to have a special court, because maybe, and there's a lot pointing in that direction, maybe the national courts will not really be able to deal with this, because this is on such a magnitude, it's so big that it is very possible that we're going to eventually need to have something like Nuremberg 2. The reason why Europe is at the center of all this is probably the most important battleground in this whole war, is because Europe is completely, definitely, totally broke. The ECB is totally broke because they bought all these bonds and papers that are totally, completely worthless. And what's even more important, the pension funds, they're completely broke. Meaning, if people find out about this, that despite their spending so much money on their pensions, there's nothing left, that's all stolen, then we're going to have a real problem. And that's one of the reasons why they're trying to get Europe under control before people understand what's really going on. The most important thing is to just spread the information, spread the truth, spread the facts to as many people as possible. And don't waste your time on those people who are aggressively on the other side, who really want to get vaccinated. I mean, it's tragic, but we will not be able to save everyone. A lot of people will lose not just their livelihoods, but also their lives. Our hand is extended to them. So if they change their minds, they're always welcome to come aboard. But those 10 or 20% of the population that I think we are in the meantime, maybe more people are beginning to ask questions, still wearing their masks, not because they don't want to get into trouble, but those 10 or 20% of the population, we're the ones who will turn the tables. And that's why we have to focus on how can we do this best. And that's why we have to connect with each other. Also, this is surprising for me, but I think it makes sense. Also, on a spiritual level, if we lose, that'll be the end of humanity, we believe. I mean, if we lose, it means we as humans lose to digitalism and to completely stark, raving, mad people. That's why we won't lose. We cannot lose because we must win. Yeah, that's what they want us to believe. That's why they invested so much money and so much effort into the mainstream media. But as far as I can tell, if I look at Germany, it's the reality is completely different from what they're trying to make us believe. Whenever I, for example, need a cab in order to go someplace in Berlin or here in Göttingen, or any other place. And I think I've spoken to at least 100 cab drivers. Almost all of them immediately tell me that, of course they know this is stupid, the mask is not doing anything. And they're not just doing this intuitively. Many of them are actually well informed because they're not watching public television. They're getting their information from the independent alternative media. The old media are pretty much dead. There's only 0.000 something 1% of the population trying to gain control over all of us. We are, if it is 10%, we're the best ones. I don't want to sound arrogant in any way, but I think this is true. And the rest of the people, those who are falling in line, those who even want to get vaccinated, as I said earlier, it's tragic, but there's nothing much we can do about them. They do not really play a role. It's tragic, but we cannot save everyone. They don't play a role for the other side at all. You know, the only role they play for them is that of cannon fodder or guinea pigs. The most important thing, as I said, is to get as much information as possible, to spread it as far as possible, and I think that's only possible if as many people as possible, connect worldwide, because that gives a certain strength which goes far beyond that of the ability to exchange information. I think this is, even though it may sound stupid, this is strength on a very spiritual level. Since I'm not a religious person, but I have come to believe that there is more. There are different levels of awareness beyond the rational stuff. I see a much better world at the end of this tunnel. There is a light at the end of this tunnel, and that's a much better world, because most of the things that we have come used to, our way of life, is very destructive, both on a personal level and on a global level. There's too much injustice, and there's too many people trying to take advantage of other people. That will change. That's the light at the end of the tunnel I can see. It probably also has to do with my legal hero. His name, he's a former Supreme Court Justice of the United States Supreme Court. His name is Louis Brandeis. 100 years ago, he took on two monstrous, large industries, the financial industry and the oil industry. And he said, because they were trying to cover everything up, and he said, sunlight is the best of disinfectants. And that is still true today. So the light at the end of the tunnel is the sunlight that we need in order to see what's going on and change things for the better. There has been progress. You have to look at the bright side. There has been progress, because more and more people are beginning to wonder. That in itself is progress. We're winning some of the court battles. We will win many more. Many people are connected with each other, as you said, who would never have believed. I wouldn't have believed that I would be speaking to you, for example.
Yeah.
And that I would be having fun speaking to you.
Yeah.
Some of the lawyers who we work with are just great people. Not those idiot lawyers who you wish didn't exist, but really good people who are not in it for the money, but who are in it for the cause. And so many other people from all walks of life, and it tells me that I've wasted my time when, for example, I went to dinner parties, small talking all the time.
Right.
That was a waste of time. I'm never, ever going to do that again.
And maybe one day history will look back on us fondly.
I think so. Absolutely.